And so I don't even know if there are any left back out there. Does anybody need one? Okay. Exodus 7 and 8. We're going to get through these chapters tonight because there's something I want us to talk about at the end that we've kind of touched on a bit but haven't really gone into the detail that we need to. So I want to do that this evening. Good to see each of you here tonight. So we got to the point, if you're on the outline on page 6, about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. We're talking about the foreknowledge of God, causation. You know, God foreknowing something does not necessarily mean that He caused that thing to happen. And you and I can do that same kind of thing. Knowing something ahead of time doesn't mean you made it happen. So what I want us to talk about at the end of class, or I guess how we would end the class, is on the subject of the sovereignty of God. Like I said, I've touched on that a few times, but we've not really dug in on that subject, and I think we need to, particularly in connection with this context of Pharaoh and the hardening of his heart and God hardening his heart and all that stuff. So we're going to start on the outline on the second point here, 7 verses 8 to 13, Aaron's first sign to Pharaoh. And I told you last week, the first sign is not one of the plagues. It's the miraculous rod, Aaron's rod. And then you get into the plagues. The first plague is actually the second sign. These miracles that we've talked about are signs. When you get to Exodus chapter 12, we learn that these signs or these miracles, as we call them, the plagues, are all judgments against the gods of Egypt. So we'll hit on each of those and like I said, hopefully move on through these 2 chapters. So chapter 7, verses 8 to 13, Aaron's first sign to Pharaoh is casting the rod down before Pharaoh and it becoming a serpent. They do that, Aaron and Moses, verse 10, just as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. What happens in response to that? Okay, the Egyptian sorcerers, magicians do the same thing. So this idea here, looking at verse 11, then Pharaoh also called, the King James says, the wise men and the sorcerers, and the New King James says the same thing. The magicians of Egypt, they did in like manner with their enchantments. And that's the word I want you to think about. The Hebrew word is a word that means their dark arts, privacy, things that are done, sleight of hand, you might say. Magic is what it is. I think it's magic. I think it's the ability. One thing, there was a link I was going to share in our group today, and I just forgot to do it, but there was actually a group of enchanters, snake charmers, that had the ability to use snakes in a variety of ways. And a lot of people think that's what it was. The spelling is, it's P-S-Y-L-L-I. If you want to look that up. The Egyptian, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's P-S-Y-L-L-I. And you can read about that on your own. But let's do this real quick. Let's turn over to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I tell you what, we're going to have quite a bit of reading tonight, so I need you guys to, when I say I need a reader, raise your hand. Somebody else do this for me. Who wants to read 2 Timothy 3:8? Jay. All right, good. Thank you. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Somebody read verses 8 through 10, please. Okay, listen to that. Now, this particular context, the Thessalonians had the mistaken idea that the Lord was coming back imminently. Because if you read 1 Thessalonians, every chapter mentions the coming of the Lord or the return of the Lord. 2 Thessalonians is written to correct the idea that they had that His coming was basically like any minute. This man of sin is going to come before any of that, before the Lord's return and all of that, the falling away, the apostasy. That's the context that we're reading here. But notice how that verse said that. This man of sin is coming with power, signs and what? Lying wonders. Okay, he could do something, but it's not, how would you say it? It's not like the genuine miraculous abilities of the apostles and others. All right, go ahead. Next verse.
And with all unrighteousness, deception among those who perish because they did not receive the love of the truth.
Unrighteous deception to those who did not love the truth. Tammy, I think it's the same thing. Pharaoh's heart was hard. Sir? Smoke and mirrors, yes. Pharaoh, and remember, we've talked about this. God told Moses ahead of time, He will not let your people go, and I'm going to use him to show my power. And so you have, I think, the same concepts right here in regard to whoever this man of sin was of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And that's what's emphasized there. They did not receive the love of the truth, verse 10. And then you get down to verse 12. They did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. I mean, that's Pharaoh all over. And if you don't believe the truth, you'll be liable to believe anything. And that's what we see with Pharaoh and his magicians. Illusions, yes. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, magic. We know, I mean, you think of magicians today and the things that they're able to do, some of it's quite amazing, but we know it's not a miracle from God. There are tricks behind it, and that's the very idea of the word enchantments. Again, the definition of that term is the dark arts. It's done in private. It's done behind the scenes somehow. It's magic. All right, who's got 2 Timothy 3:8? Okay, 2 Timothy 3 is talking about a falling away, and he mentions the magicians that Moses encountered, Jannes and Jambres. So, to me, 2 Thessalonians 2 and 2 Timothy 3 address this. How were they able to duplicate these signs? One person on the live stream is using the American Standard Version, and the ASV says the secret arts that they used. All right? So there's your first sign. But what's the difference between the serpents of Aaron and the serpents of the magicians? What happened? God's serpents ate the other ones, which shows superiority over the magicians. Okay? Verses 14 to 25, you've got the first plague, but it's the second sign. So, God has known that Pharaoh is stubborn. There's your next blank to fill in. God has known that Pharaoh is stubborn, verse 14, and that the signs would further harden his heart. This is a crash course between the God of heaven and a man who thinks he's God on earth. Remember, the Egyptian pharaohs felt that they were descendants of the gods. And so, as such, they felt they were gods. Obviously, that's not the case. The Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he refuses to let the people go. Isn't that what it says? So there again, we understand what it means when it says God hardened his heart and he hardened his heart. Okay? Go to Pharaoh, go out to the water, raise your staff, and all the waters in Egypt are going to be turned into blood. Well, that happens, and I put this in your outline. Notice the chain. God to Moses, verse 14. Moses to Aaron, verse 19. And then Aaron to Pharaoh, verse 20. And that, again, that explains when we read those verses that Moses would be like unto God to both Aaron and Moses. I'm sorry, both to Aaron and Pharaoh. So the Nile, her tributaries, look at verse 19 here in chapter 7. Stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, the streams, the rivers, the ponds, the pools of water, every source of water in Egypt. So the Nile River, her tributaries, every source of water was changed to blood. What were the magicians able to do? Well, the same thing. But it's interesting because, well, how would they do that? Because it's already been done. I don't know exactly if they had a pot of water there with them, but anyway, All the waters were in the river were turned to blood. The magicians, verse 22, did so with their enchantments. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he turned back and went into his house. Neither did he set his heart. And listen to that verse and that statement in verse 23. Pharaoh turned and went into his house. Neither did he set his heart to this also. He didn't think about it. It's this, again, this is the condition that he is in, and he perpetuates it. Now, certainly the signs, in a sense, perpetuate it, but he has allowed this to become his nature. This first plague was a strike against, and I'll spell it for you, it's H-A-P-I. I don't know how to pronounce it. Hapi? H-A-P-I, the god of the Nile. And I shared, well, 2 weeks ago when we started this outline, I shared all those links in our private group on these various gods of Egypt. Well, again, Exodus 12, I will bring judgment against all the gods of Egypt. Of course, the Nile, you look at a map of Egypt, and the Nile is like our Mississippi, isn't it? You've got the Delta, of course, that's north, and Mississippi's in the south, but you understand the point. You look at like a satellite image, and everything around that river and the tributaries and then the delta, everything's green. That's the source of life. And so you notice here in Exodus 7 and verse 21, it's not just that the blood turned to water, that the water turned to blood. What else happened in the river? All the fish died, the river stinks. So this is an insult to this God. Your God stinks, and everything He's brought to life is dead. All right? So that's a major blow to the Egyptian ego, you might say. And it says that there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. How long did it last? 7 days, verse 25. Okay? Any questions or comments on all this? No doubt about it. They put him to death. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I've killed your God. And I don't know if there's like a ranking system, but that's a pretty big God, the Nile River. Again, the source of everything for the Egyptians, source of all life, you might say. So yeah, it's a death blow to that God, Hapi. All right, chapter 8, verses 1 to 15, Aaron's third sign to Pharaoh, the second plague. Again, God to Moses, Moses to Aaron, Aaron to Pharaoh. What you might call the chain of authority here. Okay, so we're not going to read this whole account, but go unto Pharaoh, say unto him, let my people go, that they may serve me. If not, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. The river shall bring forth frogs abundantly. They're going to come up in your house, into your bedrooms, on your bed. Everywhere you go, there are going to be frogs in the land. Aaron stretches out his hand, verse 6, and it comes to pass. What do the enchanters do? Same thing. They're able to produce frogs. The magicians of Egypt, and I put this in here, were able to, in some way, duplicate this sign. How? I don't know. We're not told. But in some fashion, they were able to some extent, duplicate what happens here. But here's the thing. To produce more frogs in the presence of a bunch of frogs, is that really that impressive? I mean, that same thing's true with the blood. I mean, Aaron had already done his, and then they do the same thing, but his lasted 7 days and killed everything in connection with the water. So how impressive would it be to multiply frogs in the presence of multiple frogs? It's not that impressive. But the Egyptians had a god that looked like a frog, and his name was Hequet. I don't know how to pronounce that. Hequet. And that god personified regeneration and fertility. So again, like Jeremy pointed out, this is a strike at life itself, isn't it? This is to me, evidence of the superiority of Jehovah to the to the religious imaginations of men. Yeah, why not get rid of the frogs? Yeah. Because they told them they're going to be everywhere, to the extent they'll even be on your bed. Why not get rid of them if you're so powerful? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's the way Steve said that. The Egyptian magicians knew what they were doing was magic. How did Moses and Aaron know how to do that magic? From their perspective, you know. Yeah. Those are some things we're just not given any insight to. Now, we do get some insight here pretty soon because the magicians start believing, don't they? So they know better. Mm. Right. How far along in the signs did they really start to wonder? Okay. All right, so the plug, sorry?
I also wonder how much pressure they felt they were under as this went along to continue to please Pharaoh with an answer, you know.
Yeah.
Because that was what he was looking for. Was like, well, you know, he showed me something, now you show me something.
Well, it comes to an end now.
Yeah.
That,
I just wonder, like, in their mind, you know, Pharaoh's a pretty powerful fellow. If they fail, what's going to happen?
so here's the thing with these plagues. So water to blood. Okay, the water's already there. Whatever they did to do their enchantments, let's say convinced Pharaoh. Frogs, okay, the frogs are already there. Well, the next one, the lice or gnat swarms, depending on what version you read, they come out of nowhere. And it's at that point through the rest of the plagues that the magicians are not able to duplicate what was being done. So, we'll get to that here in just a second. So anyway, that goes down, the second plague goes down through chapter 8 and verse 15. Pharaoh, of course, requests that, give us a break here, beginning in verse 8. Get the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let the people go, that they may do sacrifice unto the Lord. Moses said unto Pharaoh, glory over me, the King James says. The New King James says, accept the honor of saying, when I shall intercede for you. A little bit different reading there. When shall I entreat thee, and for thy servants, and for thy people, to destroy the frogs from thee, and thy houses, that they may remain in the river only? And he said, tomorrow. That's interesting. He's bargaining with Pharaoh, essentially. When do you want them gone? And Pharaoh tells him, okay, we'll take care of it tomorrow. Why? Why is that bargaining going on according to verse 10? Yeah. That's what this is all about. This isn't about Pharaoh, it's not about Moses, it's not about Aaron. This is about the display of the power of God. Again, over all the gods of Egypt. I brought them in, and just like you want tomorrow, they'll be gone. So you'll know. The frogs shall depart from thee, verse 11, from your house, servants, from people, and they'll stay in the river only. And that's exactly what happens. And he hardened his heart, verse 15. So they produce the frogs, they get rid of them as soon as they say they will, and that's not good enough. The third plague, or the fourth sign, is, it begins here in verse 16 down through verse 19. And like I said, it's interesting to notice, and I put in your outline here on the back of your page 7 here, English Standard Version, the Contemporary English Version, the New Revised Standard Version, the HCSB is the Holman Christian Standard Bible. They all call this gnat swarms. So I did a little more digging in some different Hebrew dictionaries, and the idea is like gnats. When we think of lice, we think of the stuff that crawls in your hair, typically. Well, this is some kind of gnat swarm, apparently. So, another interesting thing about this plague, so far as we have in the record, you start in verse 16, there's no prior warning. Pharaoh had warning up to this point of every sign and plague, hadn't he? Well, there appears to be no prior warning here. And the magicians are not able to duplicate this sign, according to verse 18. In fact, from here on out, that's the way it's going to be. Many people believe that this was a strike against Geb, it's G-E-B, I'd say Geb, the Egyptian god of the earth, because, if you look at chapter 8 and verse 16, smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice or swarms of gnats throughout the... So you're striking the god of Egypt, you strike the land, and now you've got a swarm of whatever it is all over you. And they did so, verse 17, and it's all over everything. The people, the beasts, all the land of Egypt, and the magicians couldn't do it. Verse 18. And the magicians, and this goes back to what was it, Steve, you brought this up, about wondering about what the magicians were thinking. Verse 19, this is the finger of God. So while they could work some enchantments, this is completely different from anything that had happened before. And we have some insight. Maybe we don't need to be messing with this God, is the idea. The fourth plague is the plague of flies, verses 20 to 32. The fly god of ancient Egypt was, I really don't know how to pronounce this one. I'll just spell it for you. U-A-T-C-H-I-T. U-A-T-C-H-I-T, and symbolized vigilant protection. So what this god or goddess that protected Egypt is now a plague on Egypt, which again shows the superiority of Jehovah. And I put this in your outline here just for knowledge. Notice the "of flies" phrase is in italics. One translation of flies is noxious insects. One version actually reads that way. This plague is the first mention of God making a difference between Israel and Egypt, verses 22 and 23. How do you do that? I mean, so the Israelites are captives, right? So they're in Egypt. They have their dwellings, but they're there. And yet, they don't have a problem with flies, verses 22 and 23. Verse 23, I will put a division between my people and thy people tomorrow, shall this sign be. And the Lord did so. And it was a grievous swarm, according to verse 24. The land was filled, corrupted with a swarm, parentheses, of flies. So Pharaoh, verse 25, your next blank, Pharaoh offers a compromise. All right? Verse 25. Go ye sacrifice to your God in the land. What was their request? What's the request of God for the Israelites? Let us go. Let us go into the wilderness. He said, you can sacrifice, but stay home, or stay here. And Pharaoh, or rather Moses, is unwilling to do that. We will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to God as he commanded. And you notice verse 26, if we do that, the Egyptians are going to see us sacrificing things that they worship. The abomination of the Egyptians. Whatever they're going to sacrifice, the Egyptians worshipped it. So, would it be possible that the Egyptians think they're worshiping the same God we do? They're sacrificing the same God and to the same God? So, because of their polytheistic practices, the Egyptians might not tolerate this. You know, and there are still places in this world today that there are certain animals you don't kill because the inhabitants of that land worship them. So, something interesting to think about. Pharaoh offers a second compromise in verse 28. I will let you go, just don't go very far. And Moses is, no, that's not what we're going to do. He offers that second compromise, was relieved of the swarms, and hardened his heart. So he's just underhanded. He's a liar. Verse 32, he hardened his heart at this time also, neither would he let the people go. All right, so your first four plagues. Any questions or comments on all of that? Okay. Here's what I want us to talk about for the next, for the last 10 minutes. So we've talked a lot about God being sovereign. And what does that word mean? Somebody looked it up. What is a sovereign? All-powerful? Okay, this is, one idea behind it is like, I mean, you can actually see the word reign in it. It would be like a monarch, a king or a king or a queen, some singular, powerful individual is the idea on earth. Well, God is sovereign. There's no question about that. So who's going to read for me? All right, Tristan, 1 Chronicles 29, 11, and 12. Who else? Jeff, Revelation 4, 11. John, Daniel 4, 34 and 35. 1 Chronicles 29, 11 and 12. Revelation 4, 11. And Daniel 4, 34 and 35. And whenever you're there, read it.
1 Chronicles 29, verses 11 and 12. Thine, O Lord, is the greatness, and the power, and the glory, and victory, and majesty. For all that is in the heaven and in the earth is thine, and thine is the kingdom, O Lord, and thou art exalted as head above all.
There it is. Thou art exalted as head above all. That's the concept of sovereignty. All right? Is there more? All right. Hey, it's good. Revelation 4:11.
Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. Thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created.
Okay. The Creator who spoke all things into existence. For your pleasure, they are and were created. That is sovereignty. Daniel 4, 34 and 35. This is Nebuchadnezzar, his response after he was turned into a beast and then came back to himself. Listen to what he says.
At the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, what have you done?
No one can stop God. No one can question God. I mean, you can. Isn't that what Job did? 23 times in 42 chapters, Job says, why? And it's really not 42 chapters because you've got all of his friends speaking in between. But it's not that you can't say why, it's that God's will, God's purpose is going to be accomplished. And He's over everything. And everything that He's created, which includes us, is for His power and for His glory. That is sovereignty. The problem with sovereignty, that doesn't sound right. The problem is that people, when they talk about sovereignty, and I've talked about this last week a bit, is people think that means, the word I used is manipulates, that God manipulates every single thing that ever happens. Every decision you ever make will happen because God is sovereign, and people, who was writing about it? I can't remember. But they talk about the absolute sovereignty of God. And to me, basically, it's theological determinism. In other words, God has determined everything that ever will happen. Every decision you make, every move you make was predetermined by God. That is not sovereignty. Sovereignty means that God is overall and cannot be stopped, and that is true. That is not the same thing as He controls everything that has ever happened. So here are some words, if you want to write these down, that are part of the essence of God and part of His sovereign nature. Number one, He is immutable. What does that word mean? Anybody know? The immutable. Who wants to read for me, by the way? Tristan, James 1:17. Jeremy, go to Psalm 90 and get verse 2. Who's next? Miss Regina, Psalm 139, 6. Colin, Genesis 17:1. Garrett, Hebrews 4:13. And that'll cover us right now. So, immutable is James 1:17. Who's got that? Read it when you get there.
James 1:17. Every good and every perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness, neither shadow of turning.
Immutable means He's unchangeable. There is no variableness nor shadow of turning. God is who He is. And Hebrews 13:8 says the same thing. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's part of being sovereign. All right? Who's got Psalm 90, verse 2? Eternal. God is eternal.
Before the mountains were brought forth, wherever thou hast formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God.
From everlasting to everlasting. God is an eternal being. That's part of His sovereign essence, sovereign nature. Psalm 139:6. God is omnipresent. We have these prefixes here. Omni means all, everywhere, everything. All right, who's got it? Psalm 139:6.
Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it.
Try verse 16.
Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them.
Okay. God could see in the womb. And the same thing is said of Jeremiah in Jeremiah 1 and verse 5. Jeremiah was commissioned as a prophet before he was even born. That's God's omnipresence. Genesis 17:1. Who's got that one?
When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God, walk before me and be blameless.
I'm God Almighty, all-powerful, potent. All right, God is all-powerful. Again, that's part of His sovereignty. And that's what what's your name? John read. Nobody can withhold His hand. And that's Nebuchadnezzar saying that. All right, Hebrews 4:13, whoever's got that.
And there is no creature hidden from His sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of Him, to whom we must give account.
All right, look at this word here. Science, omniscience, knowledge. Nothing is hidden from God's sight. When we talk about the sovereignty of God, these are the characteristics we are talking about. This is the God we serve. God being sovereign does not mean, again, I know I've said this a lot, but it's important for us to grasp this, that does not mean that He manipulates everything that ever has and ever will happen. It means that He doesn't change as an eternal being, that He's all-powerful, that He is, and how do you get your mind around this concept of omnipresence? That He can see into the womb before you're even formed, before your bones even grow together. I don't understand that. And then, of course, omniscience. There are examples of that, like, what is it, in Mark chapter 3, when Jesus is teaching, and the people are thinking to themselves, and He says, why do you reason within yourselves this about me? That's omniscience. That's what we mean when we're talking about the sovereignty of God. All right, everybody go to Romans chapter 11. And I want somebody to read 11:22. Romans 11:22.
Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God on them which fell severity, but towards them.
Okay, so you got people who fall. What happens? What do they receive when they fall? Severity. All right? Go ahead and finish it now.
But towards thee goodness, if thou continue in His goodness, otherwise thou also shalt be cut off.
Towards thee goodness, if thou continue in His goodness. Now, if sovereignty meant that God controls everything that ever happens, and God has, within the context of Romans 9, 10, and 11, predetermined the particular individuals who'd be saved and lost, which they say, which a lot of people in the religious world believe is part of His sovereignty, why use the word if? And why talk about the Jewish people and say, well, they were the natural olive tree, but some of them were broken off because of their unbelief, and the Gentiles were grafted in. But if you continue in His goodness, you get His goodness. Why say that? If He's predetermined everything that's ever happened because He's sovereign, why say that? It doesn't make any sense. But that's what a lot of people think. And I told you, I think it was last week in class, that a lot of people have this concept that God has an individual plan for your life. We hear this kind of garbage from people like Joel Osteen, the televangelist, Kenneth Copeland, the health and wealth gospel preachers. That if you just become a Christian, you're going to get the job you want, your life's going to be so much better. Joel Osteen's written the same book about 43 times. The same message, your best life now. And that's the message is completely anti-biblical, but that's what people think the gospel is. I become a Christian, I'll never get sick again, I'll get the job promotion I want, I'll have the retirement plan that's not, well, it's not reality, and it's certainly not biblical. Yeah. Well, and a question I've never, and of course it's thrown back on me that I just don't like it, but I've never received a good answer to the question, if it's all predetermined because of God's sovereignty, the way sovereignty is misdefined, why do you even bother talking to me about my soul? Because and think about it this way, if God has truly predetermined everything that has ever happened, I'll come to understand that one day. Because if He's chosen me, I'll come to it one day. So don't bother me right now. I'm not there yet. And they say, the response is, well, the gospel is the means by which it happens. Like, no, it's not, because it's already determined. The gospel makes no difference at all, because it's already determined. So there again, why does Paul say, towards those who fall severity, but towards you goodness, if you continue in His goodness? It makes no sense at all. God being sovereign is talking about His immutable, eternal, all-powerful, everywhere present, all-knowing essence. And we need to have a good grasp of that. There's so much biblical text that addresses that, and I don't know, I guess you'd say it's the preacher's fault that we don't talk about that enough, but that's a subject we need to have a good understanding of and appreciation for, because this is the God we serve. Yeah. It defeats it. And okay, so Tammy makes a good point. Why in the world then would people like Joshua, who Moses commissioned to be the next man up, why would Joshua say, choose this day whom you will serve, if it's already been determined? Don't you think Joshua, who would be filled with the Holy Spirit like Moses was, would know that? And if he knew that, why would he say, you need to choose? And you think about, well, where the Bible ends in Revelation 22:17. Whosoever will, let him come and take of the water of life freely. Why say that? Well, the answer is, you have free will because God's determined what you will do. That's your will because God's given it to you. Like I told you, I'm actually getting ready to read the second time Martin Luther's book on the bondage of the will, and it's written in 1525. It's not an easy read at all. But it's a bunch of double talk and self-contradictory circular reasoning. It's this because it's this, and it's that because it's that. It's like it's completely illogical and unbiblical. But most of the Protestant denominational world believes in this view of the sovereignty of God, that He has a plan for every particular individual's life, and everything that has ever happened has already been laid out in all eternity, to the extent of even the angels who fell were predetermined. Yeah.
When thinking topics like this, I like to put the Bible to explain for us. If you look from where we've just been looking in Exodus, going up through where the Israelites go to take what was given to them by God, the land. What were the nations around there? What did they tell them? They were fearful because they had heard of what had happened. What we're studying right here in Exodus. The power of God through these plagues.
Mhm.
Those nations were scared.
Yeah.
All they would have had to do is follow through with the will of what God told them to do, and that land would have been theirs, and they would have had much less trouble. But they didn't follow through with the will of God when they took the land.
Yeah.
And did they make that choice?
Well, if not, then God predetermined their lack of faith and their lack of obedience. They had no choice in the matter. Yeah, yeah. Well, and think about what you bring up is a good point. Even Rahab, a citizen of Jericho, said, "Our hearts melted within us when we heard of you coming, because we know what your God can do."
And that's one of the reasons that the plagues were done.
Yeah,
So other nations would have that fear
yeah,
of what God had done.
yeah. Absolutely.
This is kind of the same kind of thinking that Job's friends had. They told, they kept talking to him, you had to do something bad for him to do this to you. It's that same kind of thinking.
Yeah, to an extent.
If you're good, nothing bad will happen.
Right.
And, and Job was good, but everything happened to Job.
Yeah. Well, more than sovereignty, their view was, if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. It's like retribution theology. Karma, as we call it today. And that's wrong. Yeah. We need to have a deep understanding and appreciation for the sovereignty of God, for what it is biblically, not for what we read in Martin Luther's books and other things. Those things are good to read to see the other side of the coin, but your knowledge has to be based in the Bible. I don't care what Martin Luther said as such, because I know what Scripture says. But I want to see it from his perspective too. You can't just shut yourself off and say, well, I don't care about anything anybody else says. Well, maybe you're wrong about something. Maybe you need to change your mind, and I've done that myself over the years. But anyway. Okay.